Warning, this particular episode is going to be just jam-packed with thrilling mature content. We're talking all about scandalous historical events, complete with graphic descriptions to really titillate your senses. Listener discretion is advised. Please, won't somebody please think of the children?
And just a tiny little thing to keep in mind. We all love being interrupted by ads while trying to enjoy some precious historical content. It's not like we could do without those ever so fascinating paid promotions that miraculously support the podcast's production costs. But hey, who needs an uninterrupted historical journey when you can have some good old product placements, right?
Broadcasting live from an undisclosed bunker, it's the Reasonably Priced Time Machine Podcast, with your host, Professor Ryan Lancaster. Also featuring a good dose of mediocrity from the talents of Archie and Hildy.
Episode 73, Sail Far, Steal Stuff, Blame God.
Welcome back to The Reasonably Priced Time Machine, the only historical podcast where the flux capacitor is held together with duct tape. I'm Professor Lancaster, your guide through history's most questionable decisions and humanity's chronic inability to learn from them.
This week we're tackling a highlight reel of conquest, greed, and people sailing across oceans to ruin somebody else's day.
Nobody comes out of this smelling like roses. Except maybe the roses, but they've probably been trampled by conquistadors.
Strap in, time travelers. It's going to be educational, depressing, and just entertaining enough to make you forget that history is basically the same 5 mistakes on repeat.
Introduction.
The story of America doesn't start with fireworks and apple pie. It begins with desperation, disease, and a mad scramble for land, gold, and glory. Between 1528 and 1620, 3 European superpowers of Spain, France, and England clawed their way into the so-called New World, each with their flavor of conquest, trade, and accidental genocide. They didn't come for sightseeing. These were men driven by greed, religious zeal, and reckless ambition that makes history books worth reading. If you want a clean-cut narrative about noble explorers and benevolent settlers, you might want to look elsewhere. The birth of the Americas was not a sanitized fairy tale. It was a brutal and bloody mess, a fever dream of conquest and survival that set the stage for everything we call civilization today. First up, the Spanish. No one did conquest quite like them. They didn't just dip their toes in the water. They went in head first, armor gleaming, swords drawn, ready to baptize the natives in steel and smallpox. Case in point, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, whose last name means head of a cow. He washed up on the shores of modern-day Texas in 1528 after a failed expedition, looking less like a conquistador and more like a shipwrecked lunatic. For 8 years, he wandered through indigenous territories, surviving starvation, enslavement, and the kind of psychedelic journey that would make Hunter S. Thompson proud. By the time he staggered back to Spanish-controlled Mexico, he was less a conqueror and more a spiritual guru, raving about mystical cures and the interconnectedness of humanity. The Spanish crown nodded politely, ignored his philosophical ramblings, and returned to what they did best, which was pillaging. Through the encomienda system, they turned entire native populations into a workforce, mining silver, farming crops, and dying en masse. It was brutal and it was unfortunately effective. The Spanish model of exploitation built empires, even as it destroyed civilizations. While the Spanish were busy building golden cities on the backs of indigenous corpses, the French took a different approach. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to trade. Beavers specifically. Yes, while Spain lusted after gold, the French lusted after rodents. Guys like Samuel de Champlain and Jacques Cartier rolled into Canada, shook hands with the locals, and said, hey, let's make some deals. Instead of cutting down entire villages, they traded shiny trinkets for furs, forming alliances with indigenous tribes and inadvertently setting off a series of intertribal wars that would reshape the continent. It was capitalism in its earliest, purest form. Chaotic, unpredictable, and profitable. The French got their furs. The natives got guns. Everybody has diseases. Progress. But despite their seemingly friendly approach, the French couldn't escape the inevitable truth of colonization. Even the best-intentioned interactions append entire ways of life. The fur trade created wealth, but it also sparked violence, displaced indigenous communities, and planted the seeds of future conflicts. No European power could enter the continent without leaving behind a trail of unintended consequences. This is a crucial aspect of history that often gets overlooked in traditional narratives of exploration and conquest. Then there was the English, stumbling onto the scene like the guy late to the party, already half drunk and picking fights. Their first attempt at colonization with the colony of Roanoke quickly disappeared. Not exactly a promising start. But in 1607, they tried again with Jamestown, Virginia, a mosquito-infested death trap that nearly wiped out its settlers in the first few years. Imagine a group of English gentlemen, utterly unprepared for life without servants, starving to death while stubbornly refusing to farm. They spent more time searching for non-existent gold than planting food. At one point, they resorted to eating their horses, then their dogs, then their shoes, then allegedly each other. And yet, they survived. Because survival is what humans do. Jamestown wasn't just a random colony. It was the petri dish for American resilience, capitalism, and manifest destiny. Through sheer force of will, and, let's be honest, some aggressive land grabbing, the English carved out a foothold in the New World, establishing a society that would eventually become the blueprint for the United States. They brought the concepts of private property, individual liberty, and democratic governance, ideas that would later form the backbone of American ideology. But they also brought enslavement, displacement, and a level of arrogance that would make future generations question whether progress and morality were ever genuinely compatible. Then there's the Columbian Exchange, the chaotic, world-altering swap meet between the old and new worlds. This was not just a simple exchange of goods. It was a transformative event that reshaped global economies and permanently altered human history. Picture a 16th century flea market where Europe, Africa, and the Americas threw everything they had onto the table. Things like food, animals, weapons, and death. The results, where Europe got corn, potatoes, tomatoes, chocolate, and tobacco. Their diets improved, their populations boomed, and suddenly everyone was addicted to nicotine. The Americas got horses, cows, pigs, wheat. And, oh yeah, smallpox, measles, and influenza, which wiped out up to 90% of the indigenous population. Africa got guns and manufactured goods. In return, European traders ramped up the transatlantic slave trade, leading to centuries of human trafficking that would shape the future of the Americas. It was a brutal but transformative exchange, fueling global economies' rise and permanently altering human history. Some historians see it as progress, others see it as devastation. The truth is that it is both. That's the thing with history. It's never just one thing. So, what's the takeaway from all this bloodshed and upheaval? History is messy, violent, and complicated. The European conquest of the Americas wasn't a story of heroes and villains. It was a raw and unfiltered struggle for power, wealth, and survival. The Spanish left behind a legacy of empire building and cultural fusion. The French played the role of traders, dealmakers, and opportunists, forever altering indigenous societies. Despite their staggering incompetence, the English laid the groundwork for a new nation built on individualism, capitalism, and the pursuit of self-determination. And here we are today still grappling with the consequences. The world we live in, our economies, our governments, our social structures, was born in this era of chaos and conquest.
Zammouri.
It's the 16th century, the so-called age of discovery, when men with questionable motives and worse navigational skills ventured into the unknown under the guise of glory and God. Among these was a Moroccan named Zammouri, a man swept into the violent theater of colonial greed not by choice, but by the relentless currents of human exploitation. This wasn't your average explorer, no gilded compass or puffed-up sense of divine mission here, just a man trying to survive the chaos of conquest. Zammouri, also known as Estebanico in the annals of whitewashed history, was plucked from his life in Morocco by Portuguese traders, who had perfected the fine art of ruining other people's lives. Sold into slavery, he found himself in the company of a conquistador with a penchant for failure. This explorer's expedition to the New World was a spectacular disaster, a masterclass in hubris. Florida didn't offer the riches they dreamed of. Instead, it chewed them up and spit them out, leaving Zammouri and a few hapless survivors stranded on the coast of modern-day Texas. And here's where it gets wild. Stripped of their colonial pomp, these men were reduced to the same status as the savages they'd come to conquer. But while others floundered, Zammouri adapted. Over time, he transformed from a nameless captive into a healer, wielding a mystique that indigenous groups found fascinating and perhaps unnerving. It's unclear whether his methods were born from actual knowledge or sheer improvisation, but the man worked miracles or convinced people he could, adding to the enigma of his character. For nearly 8 years, Zammouri roamed what would become the American Southwest, traveling some 6,000 miles across landscapes as unforgiving as the conquistadors themselves. Along the way, he navigated a bizarre tightrope of respect and subjugation. To the native peoples, He was a spiritual figure, a bridge to the divine. To the Spanish, he was a tool, a means to an end, a guide, interpreter, and, ultimately, a pawn in their imperial game. But the Spanish didn't like the idea of a man like El Zammouri stealing their spotlight. When they wrote their histories, they reduced him to a footnote, a sideshow to their tale of conquest. Yet El Zammouri's survival, his ability to navigate multiple worlds without belonging fully to any of them, stands as a stark contrast to the myth of European supremacy, a quiet rebellion against the injustice of his marginalization. His story ended abruptly at the hands of the Zuni people, who, for reasons lost to time, decided they'd had enough of his act. This was a grim reminder of the fragility of his role as a cultural intermediary, a man caught between worlds, never fully trusted by either. El Zammouri's life mirrors the messy, brutal realities of colonial history. He wasn't a conqueror or a hero, he was a survivor, a reluctant adventurer thrust into a world that demanded constant reinvention. His legacy lies not in conquest, but in his remarkable resilience, in his ability to adapt to an existence that was never truly his own. In the end, El Zammouri challenges the sanitized narratives of exploration and conquest. His story is one of resilience and oppression, of a man who carved out a fragile place for himself in a world hell-bent on erasing him. It's a tale that resonates even now, a reminder that history's greatest myths are often built on the backs of those it tries to forget.
French Colonization Part 1.
Envision a cadre of feather-hatted French adventurers armed with muskets, rosaries, and a zeal for ambition disproportionate to their logistical foresight, careening headlong into the rugged theater of 16th century North America. This was the world of Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain, a grand experiment where noble aspirations frequently collided with stunning incompetence. Add a twist of cultural cross-pollination, a dash of bureaucratic indifference, and voila. New France, the colonial fever dream with a side order of cautionary satire. Jacques Cartier, our pioneering protagonist of 1534, charted the icy St. Lawrence River in search of gold, only to unearth Canada. While maple syrup aficionados may cheer, Cartier's treasure chest remained conspicuously barren, save for the frozen misfortune of his ill-prepared settlers. His exploits embody the ethos, minimal preparation, boundless optimism, and the audacity to bootstrap civilization amidst sub-zero chaos. Had Cartier succeeded, the French would have introduced us to the marvel of drive-through poutine centuries earlier. Alas, his legacy lies in frostbite, frayed tempers, and the subtle art of alienating indigenous neighbors. Fast forward to 1608, when Samuel de Champlain strode onto the stage armed with sturdier hats, superior cartography, and a knack for alliance building. Champlain was less an explorer and more a diplomat-turned-social coordinator, pairing French musketeers with Huron warriors in an uneasy tangle of necessity. Together, they squared off against the Iroquois Confederacy, proving that even colonial alliances were less about harmony and more about calculated survival. Champlain's approach, though pragmatic, wasn't entirely altruistic. Indigenous allies were treated as useful but ultimately expendable interns, hardly the model of equitable partnership. Still, the French seemed downright progressive compared to the British, who saw smallpox as a hallmark greeting card. Enter the Métis, cultural trailblazers born of French traders and indigenous communities. This hybrid society became a cornerstone of New France, blending fur trading savvy with a linguistic finesse that would put modern polyglots to shame. The Métis, with their resilience and adaptability, embodied the possibility of coexistence, challenging colonial norms with their mere existence. Yet even this luminous chapter in New France's history was tarnished by mercenary priorities. For all their talk of partnership, the French treated the fur trade as a capitalist conquest first and a cultural exchange second. Let's not romanticize it. New France was a business deal draped in the trappings of diplomacy. The decline of New France didn't come with a dramatic flourish, but rather the methodical shuffle of bureaucratic paper in Versailles. While the British colonists thrived with agricultural zeal and reproductive vigor, France managed a mere trickle of settlers and a smattering of king's daughters to bolster the population. Suffice it to say that laissez-faire isn't ideal for nation building. By the French and Indian War, British settlers outnumbered the French 20-1, and Versailles couldn't be bothered to prioritize its colonial foothold. The Treaty of Paris in 1763 sealed New France's fate, and Champlain, had he been alive, would likely have staged an exasperated snowball protest. This was the dramatic end of New France, a colonial experiment that had its moments of brilliance but ultimately succumbed to strategic myopia and over-centralization. So, what can we learn from New France besides the importance of packing adequate winter gear? For one, decentralization has its pitfalls. Micromanaging a colony from 4,000 miles away is as futile as paddling upstream with a baguette. Cultural fusion, far from being a soft ideal, proves essential for survival, but only when respect and reciprocity underpin the exchange. Finally, colonial ambition without population growth is like a social media profile without posts, destined for obscurity. These are the lessons that New France offers, enlightening us about the complexities of colonial history. New France offers lessons galore. Champlain's alliances demonstrate that voluntary cooperation often succeeds where coercion fails. The Métis underscore the resilience born of diversity. And France's downfall is a timeless reminder that strategic myopia and over-centralization are recipes for irrelevance. New France, a peculiar patchwork of ambition, folly, and fleeting brilliance. Somewhere amidst the frostbitten settlers, fur-laden canoes, and diplomatic dance-offs lies a story of human perseverance in all its chaotic glory. And hey, at least they didn't leave us with pineapple on pizza.
And now, a short commercial break and a word from our sponsors. Are you exhausted from pretending any of this matters? Do you lie awake at night, haunted by the crushing weight of existence?
Then try nothing.
Nothing doesn't promise happiness. It doesn't offer purpose. It just sits there, empty, perfect, and quietly honest about how little any of this means. Unlike other products, nothing won't ask for your data, your loyalty, or your soul. Because nothing doesn't care. And neither should you.
Which is still more fulfilling than your last online purchase.
And for a limited time, we'll send you an extra dose of nothing, because frankly, there's an infinite supply, and the void is generous.
No boxes, no shipping, no meaning. Just pure, uncut existential resignation.
So stop chasing dreams, likes, or validation. Choose nothing. Because if the universe doesn't care, why should you?
Nothing. Finally, a product that lives up to your expectations. By having none.
And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Hernan Cortez.
Imagine Hernán Cortez swaggering onto the grand stage of history, armed with a steel blade, questionable ethics, and the confidence of a man auditioning for Survivor Mesoamerica Edition. The year is 1519, and our backdrop is the vibrant expanse of Mesoamerica, a realm brimming with architectural splendor, ritualistic fervor, and cultural sophistication so profound it makes Renaissance Europe look like a quaint book club fumbling through the art of war. For Cortez, this wasn't an intricate tapestry of human achievement, it was an open treasure chest. Spoiler alert, the ending isn't great if you're rooting for the locals. Cortez didn't just arrive on the Yucatan Peninsula, he crash-landed with all the subtlety of a cannonball and a tea party. Among his first acts were smashing idols in Cozumel with the unrestrained zeal of a colonial interior decorator gone rogue. This wasn't just vandalism, it was an early entry in the conquistador's handbook of unsolicited cultural upgrades. When in doubt, destroy. The indigenous onlookers, caught between horror and bewilderment, probably wondered if this strange pale man was a god, a lunatic, or perhaps both. Enter Lama Linche, translator, tactician, and the most enigmatic PR manager in history. A woman of breathtaking pragmatism, she served as Cortez's bridge between the old world and the Nahua. Was she a traitor, a survivor, or merely a figure with more layers than an Aztec codex? Lama Linche and Cortez formed a partnership that was as unlikely as it was impactful. Their offspring, Morgan, became the living metaphor for their work, half collision, half collaboration, wholly complex. Welcome to the Columbian Exchange, where history decides to try remixing culture. Cortez's conquest wasn't just about toppling empires, it was the dawn of history's ultimate swap meet. Europe traded potatoes, tomatoes, and chocolate for horses, pigs, and smallpox, the microbial equivalent of an unsolicited house guest that overstays its welcome. While old world economies boomed, new world civilizations disintegrated at alarming speed. Meanwhile, Tenochtitlan, once a shimmering jewel of canals and temples, transformed into Mexico City, a colonial Frankenstein of cathedrals atop ruins. Was it progress? Perhaps. But the cost was steep, paid in lives and legacies, and the bill still haunts the cobblestones. Cortés wasn't just a conqueror, he was a strategist par excellence, or a manipulative opportunist, depending on your vantage point. His alliances with indigenous groups, particularly the Tlaxcalans, were political jiu-jitsu. Promised liberation from Aztec dominance, these groups soon became pawns in Cortés's grand game. Divide, conquer, and repeat became his mantra. But let's not reduce the indigenous peoples to mere victims. They were active agents in a volatile drama, navigating a landscape where survival meant striking uneasy bargains. Some resisted, others adapted, and a few gambled and lost. Their choices, however fraught, were rooted in a profoundly human calculus: survival at any cost. Recognizing the agency of indigenous peoples in this volatile landscape is not just a matter of historical accuracy, but a way of showing them the respect they deserve. Fast forward to today, and Cortés's shadow looms large. His legacy isn't just the ruins of Tenochtitlan, but the legal, economic, and religious systems he helped seed that fueled centuries of exploitation. His ideological armor, the conquistador's prototype of manifest destiny, found reincarnation in empires from London to Washington. Yet, history has a knack for resilience. Indigenous cultures, though battered, adapted and endured, fusing old traditions with new influences. Latin America's mestizo identity, born of conquest and contradiction, is a living testament to the enduring power of synthesis. It seems history is less a clean narrative and more a kaleidoscope. It's beautiful, messy, and utterly resistant to simplification. The mestizo identity is a reassuring reminder that new and vibrant cultures can emerge even in the face of great upheaval. Cortés forces us to ask, is progress ever pure? Or does it always demand collateral damage? For all its brutality, his conquest left a legacy of resilience and reinvention. Indigenous peoples were not erased. They endured, innovated, and adapted. Their agency, overshadowed in conquest narratives, deserves its moment in the sun. This story isn't just a tale of ambition, it's a moral mirror asking what we're willing to sacrifice to pursue progress. The answer, then and now, often involves those least able to resist. The conquest of Mexico is history's tragic and comical opera, a chaotic collision of ambition, destruction, and unintended consequences. Cortés reminds us of humanity's capacity for both brilliance and barbarism. As we savor French fries and hot chocolate thanks to the Columbian Exchange, let's reflect on the absurd, poignant, and often painful stories that shaped our world. Because history, like a well-crafted joke, can make you laugh right before it punches you in the gut.
Saint Augustine.
In the annals of history's absurd endurance tests, St. Augustine takes a gold medal, or perhaps a tarnished silver given its blood-soaked ground. Founded in 1565, this Floridian fever dream markets itself as the oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States, a title that sounds as much like a flex as it does a cautionary tale. Think of it as the colonial era's answer to the question, what if ambition had no chill? Enter Pedro Menéndez de Ávilas, Spain's designated driver of imperial ambitions, armed with a royal edict and a vendetta. King Philip II, a man whose hobbies included micromanaging the apocalypse, had one directive: plant a Spanish flag, preferably on French soil. Menéndez didn't just aim to establish a colony. He set out to wrest Florida from Protestant heretics and turn the swamp into a Catholic theme park. His nemesis was John Ribout, a Huguenot with a penchant for bad timing and worse luck. By August 28th, Menéndez and his crew landed, conveniently naming their settlement after St. Augustine's feast day because Catholicism thrives on a well-timed rebrand. Meanwhile, Ribout and his French compatriots were busy losing a naval game of chicken with a hurricane. Menéndez seized the moment, channeling divine providence, or cutthroat opportunism, and turned Fort Caroline into a bloodbath, executing most of the French garrison in the name of orthodoxy. It was less love thy neighbor and more convert or die. St. Augustine wasn't just a settlement but a pyramid scheme of suffering. Every Spaniard who arrived thought they were staking a claim to paradise, only to find themselves elbow deep in mosquito bites and existential dread. Diplomacy with the local Timucua people was half-hearted at best, a begrudging recognition that survival required at least pretending to play nice. And yet, even this fragile détente couldn't shield St. Augustine from the universe's cosmic pranks. Cue Sir Francis Drake in 1586, raiding the settlement like a pirate on spring break, torching everything that wasn't already sinking into the marsh. The Spanish were built because resilience is just another word for collective stubbornness. Despite its shaky start and the near-constant threat of annihilation by English pirates, indigenous uprisings, or the simple fact that Florida weather is an antagonist in its own right, St. Augustine endured. But it wasn't pretty, as the settlers alternated between begging Spain for reinforcements and resorting to DIY survival tactics, a mix of desperate ingenuity and sheer dumb luck. By the 17th century, the settlement had transitioned from a strategic outpost to a geopolitical middle finger aimed at English colonists creeping south. However, imperial ambitions have limits, especially when the mothership Spain is busy hemorrhaging gold and relevance. St. Augustine survived not because it was imperative, but because no one wanted to admit failure. Today, St. Augustine has transformed into a picturesque tourist trap, where costumed actors reenact colonial life for crowds blissfully unaware of the atrocities underpinning this history. The cobblestone streets tell a sanitized tale, but if you listen closely, you might hear the whispers of the Timucua, the French, and the Spanish settlers who gambled their lives for a patch of unrelenting wilderness. St. Augustine isn't a monument to triumph, it's a shrine to human ambition's messy, brutal, and often misguided nature. It reminds us that empires, like mosquitoes, always overstay their welcome, and that history, for all its grandeur, usually boils down to a series of questionable decisions made by people over their heads.
Luzonians.
On October 18, 1587, a resilient band of Filipinos etched their footprints into North American soil, becoming the continent's inaugural Asian visitors. Yes, long before the Puritans unloaded their theological baggage at Plymouth Rock, and before Pocahontas became a corporate mascot, and centuries before avocado toast ascended to brunch royalty, a group of overtaxed Filipino sailors stumbled ashore, their determination undiminished by the fresh challenges that awaited them. Their motley crew was under the command of Pedro de Unamuno, a Spanish explorer with the ambition of Christopher Columbus and the logistical finesse of a toddler with an IKEA manual. This event, monumental as it was, barely rippled the vast pond of America's historical consciousness. The national psyche seems to have collectively shrugged. Behold the Manila Galleons, 16th century globalization's answer to Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day delivery and with bonus scurvy. These creaky leviathans traversed oceans laden with silks, spices, and Spain's imperial delusions. Filipinos were conscripted to endure back-breaking labor for a cause as foreign to them as churros were to the Chumash. Unamuno, their intrepid captain, was the quintessential overachiever. He juggled bureaucratic red tape, confiscated ships, and enough existential crises to fuel a midlife memoir. His crew resembled the United Nations of the Age of Sail. Spaniards, Filipinos, and even a Japanese boy, all united by the singular goal of not meeting a watery end. Their diverse backgrounds added a rich layer to the historical narrative. Upon reaching Morro Bay, Unamuno's team literally wasted no time staking their claim by erecting a cross and declaring the land for Spain. The Chumash, local stewards of the land, watched with what was likely a blend of curiosity and palpable side-eye. Attempts at cultural exchange fizzled faster than an awkward blind date, ensuring that any peaceful aspirations remained hypothetical. Don't romanticize this as some idyllic meeting of civilizations. The landing was less a handshake across cultures and more a prelude to the imperialist parade of horror. Crosses as territorial flags, discovery as a pretext for conquest, and a foreshadowing of the colonial chaos soon to engulf the continent. Squint hard enough, and you can almost hear Manifest Destiny's engine sputtering to life. History loves its loud protagonists, and the 1587 landing barely whispers in America's cacophonous origin story. Yet, the significance of this event cannot be understated. We gravitate toward pilgrim hats and turkey-laden lore, while Unamuno's Filipino sailors, the first Asian visitors to North America, languish in the historical equivalent of a low-budget B-movie's credits. This moment should resonate for Filipino Americans, a quiet proclamation that their heritage predates America itself. But the legacy is complicated. These sailors were both cogs in Spain's imperial machine and victims of it, caught in a system that demanded their labor while erasing their humanity. History, ever the trickster, juxtaposes pride and pain in a narrative as warped as a funhouse mirror. What can Morro Bay teach a world addicted to fast takes and faster Wi-Fi? For starters, globalization didn't arrive with Instagram influencers. Its roots stretch back to the unsung toilers of the past, people like these Filipino sailors, who worked, suffered, and unwittingly laid the groundwork for a globalized world. It also underscores how non-European contributions are systematically sidelined, leaving rich narratives to gather dust on the margins. Morro Bay isn't just a footnote, it's a nudge, a reminder to widen our historical lens beyond the usual suspects of Plymouth and Jamestown. Picture a ragged crew of sailors sunburned and starving, stumbling onto a rocky California coast, unwitting extras in a story that history barely acknowledges. Their cross was a beacon of hope and a warning flare of imperialism's shadow. The Chumash they encountered were not passive witnesses to discovery, but the rightful heirs of a land falsely declared new. This wasn't some sanitized hallmark moment of cultural unity. It was messy, absurd, and profoundly human. A chaotic blend of ambition, misunderstanding, and blind faith. And therein lies its value. This isn't just a first landing to check off a timeline, but a snapshot of history's messy, magnificent folly. We remember it not for its perfection, but for its imperfection, a reminder that there's something worth preserving even in chaos. Let's give a shout out to the fantastic team behind the scenes. Our executive producers, Ryan Lancaster and Ryan Lancaster, have been the driving force. Thanks to Ryan Lancaster, our sound engineer, for ensuring our voices sound their best. Ryan Lancaster's music composition adds that perfect touch to each episode. Our diligent research team, consisting of Ryan Lancaster and Ryan Lancaster, provides valuable insights. And a nod to Ryan Lancaster and Ryan Lancaster, handling all things marketing and promotion. Special thanks to our families and friends for their unwavering support and the entire creative community. And, of course, a massive shout out to our listeners. Your feedback keeps us motivated. We're proud to have recorded this episode at the Ryan Lancaster Studios, our creative hub. Remember, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of Ryan Lancaster and our guests. Until next time, I'm Professor Ryan Lancaster, and this is the RPTM Podcast.
Congratulations, dear listeners, you've survived another riveting episode of the Reasonably Priced Time Machine podcast. I'm sure you're all thrilled to have spent your precious time on a podcast that takes you on a journey to the past, and by that, I mean the golden era of dial-up internet and brick-sized cell phones. But don't worry, we're here to remind you that no matter how advanced technology gets, we'll always find a way to look back at it nostalgically while struggling to remember where we left our car keys. If you've managed to maintain your sanity after this roller coaster of reminiscence, you might want to check out the show notes, conveniently located on the website ryanglancaster.com, because who doesn't love sifting through web pages? And hey, if this auditory trip down memory lane hasn't completely crushed your spirits, be sure to rate us on whatever platform you're using to stream this auditory antiquity, because your feedback truly keeps us stuck in the past.